Greetings, old souls. It's Dr. J, and this week we are talking about the soul. The soul. So, if you hang out with me at all, you know that I absolutely believe or live by the principle that we are souls evolving. We are souls first, and we are human experiences second. That the human experience is a kind of vehicle for the soul's growth and evolution. And I believe that a lot of you, if you're watching this, feel the same way. And yet, we often find ourselves making choices in life that kind of betray that belief. And so I wanted to spend some time just digging a little deeper into what it means to be a soul, and how do we reconcile not only our conversations with other people about whether there's a soul or not, or whether we are souls or not, but even to reconcile the conversation that lives inside ourselves. So let's start by maybe talking about what we're not talking about. So first of all, for me, I don't think there's much use in debating some of the more mainstream ideas of the soul, meaning something that we have, right? Something we possess, and we think of it as somehow separate from the self, which just in itself is kind of an irreconcilable and poorly thought through belief, right? Doesn't even make sense if you kind of add it up. In some ways, it would suggest that somehow if we have a soul and we lose a soul, that we could still exist. I can't even begin to understand where that seems logical or sensible. The next thing that I would like to just move on from is the idea that the soul, that even if we are souls, that somehow we are being judged or evaluated as though the soul were a competitor in the Olympics. And at the end of a life, we're going to go and there's going to be a judge and jury. Now, do I personally feel that there is an evolutionary process, and that the universe does give us feedback, and that the soul does take on different forms and different expressions based on what you might call karma or even performance? Sure, I do think that there is consequence in the sense that all things are interrelated, all things are interconnected. So could you say it is as if we are judged between lives? Well, sure, I think you could say it is as if, but it becomes remarkably dangerous when we start to literalize and factualize concepts and systems that are ultimately best understood as metaphorical or symbolic, helping us to understand something that ultimately defies material science and material logic. Although I don't necessarily believe that we will forever find the soul outside the scope of scientific understanding. There are all kinds of studies and types of research that have implied the soul, whether it's the research that shows the difference in body weight after a person dies, right? There seems to be an immediate loss of some material weight, even just moments after death, when there could be no physical loss of material. There's also a tremendous amount of research on the survival of consciousness. There's also a lot of research that's been done on the non-local nature of consciousness, and certainly the field of past lives and past life regression. These are all systems and sciences that are attempting to help us to better understand if we are souls or not. But from there, I'd like to suggest that the soul, in many ways, frankly, like anything in life, is a human concept. It's a human construct. So no matter how we describe it, no matter how much detail we get into, it's still just going to be a working model. And I would argue that a healthy relationship to being a soul is not only to understand that any picture that someone gives you, whether it's me or someone else or something you intuit yourself, it's still just a working model. The mind is a filter for the ultimate nature of reality. And we know that. We even know that through the lens of science, that all around me here is the appearance of color and shape and form and life. But the way I experience it is completely different than the way, let's say, a bee would experience it. Or if we had the capacity to look at all things around me through a quantum microscope and see things at the subatomic or quantum level. All these things would appear completely differently. So, what's the point? The point is that it's probably best to think in terms of what feels truthful rather than what is true. There is a trap in looking for certainty in life. There is a gift in embracing curiosity. Certainty is the trap. Curiosity leads to clarity. Ultimately, when it comes to the inner world, I think that's the best we can do. We cultivate clarity day by day. And we do that by feeling what's in alignment, feeling what seems authentic, feeling what brings us energy, and committing to the soul's journey. So let's talk about that for a minute. I would argue, and this is going to sound almost dismissive and maybe even disappointing to some people, but I would argue that it's okay, and maybe even a good idea to just simply think of living as a soul as a practice. Like, just let go of the whole debate as to whether it's true or how true it is, because typically what's behind that question is the desire for permission. We're looking for permission to believe in something, to shape our identity in a way that creates fear. And that fear arises for all kinds of reasons, but mostly because it's something we don't understand, mostly because it runs against conditioning. You know, it reminds me of something that the rather famous author and speaker Tony Robbins said a long time ago when he was still very much an organizational development guy and before he became the superstar that he is today. There's this wonderful video that you can find where Tony Robbins talks about how identity is one of the center points of human experience, and that we will fight to preserve and protect our identity, in some cases almost beyond all else. Who am I? Who do I think I am? What are my values? Or who threatens my values? Who threatens who I think I am? And it's fascinating to think about the extent that people will go to defend their identity. Now, I believe that this is because identity is more real in the human experience than physical reality. In other words, the thought of losing who you are is often equally or more powerful than the idea of physical death itself. So you think of the death of a job, the death of a relationship, the death of a loved one. Any of these things that threaten our very identity, for many of us, it's as if it were threatening us to the very core of our lives. And why is that important? Well, it's important because if at some level we have internalized our conditioning around identity, that science is the marker, that the material world is the playing field of proof, then we loosen our grip on the soul and the spiritual world. But when we let that all go and we simply commit to the idea that living as a soul is a practice, then we can move on to the much deeper work of recognizing that if we are souls, then at some level we are united with all of creation, both in energy and consciousness. It means that the patterns of the universe are alive within us, the elements of the universe are alive within us. It means we are never alone. And it means that we can discern not randomly, not personally, but by listening to the laws of the universe alive inside us as the soul that we are. The soul is just a word for the mysterious phenomena of the consciousness and energy that seems to comprise a life. What would you need to do today to begin to practice living like a soul?